Hey there friends, it's been a good while since my last video now, hasn't it? With college, work and everything else happening in life, I haven't had a whole lot of time or motivation to make videos or to just play Minecraft. However, I am currently on a 1 month break, and more importantly, I have also found the motivation to start making videos again, at least for the time being. And so, to ease myself back into content creation, I am going to start a new mini-series where I'll review and talk about old farms and redstone contraptions that I have made, kicking things off with this very video. Specifically, I want to go over things made by LookOverDare or LOD. But who exactly is LOD, as most of you are likely asking? Well, LOD used to be an old persona I went by before I decided to quote-unquote quit YouTube and Minecraft. Of course, LOD is still very much around, I just go by a different name now, but that's a long and awkward story I would rather not discuss. What's important to know is that I deleted the channel, which meant that the farm published under LOD are at large lost to the world, with the only existing archive being this mostly unknown post by Unsai on Nutech's Discord server. At the start of my break about a week ago, I needed an old redstone contraption for a project that I planned to work on. Unfortunately, I no longer have access to all worlds on my machine and the links on Inside posts did not work. Fortunately, however, I was able to recover my Mediafire account and access the contraption I was looking for, as well as my other long-forgotten works, which was what gave me the idea to make this mini-series. Through this mini-series, I want to breathe new life into my old farms and contraptions by going through my works in reverse chronological order, starting with the most recent one. This means that the contraptions will progressively get worse and worse with every new episode. Anyways, you are probably tired of my rambling by now, but before we start, there is one final thing that I must do. Now, that feels familiar. Although I am pretty sure that Endermen are not supposed to be down here. Alright then, enough tomfoolery for now and let us finally hop into the first world. Alright, so here we are with my 12 game tick Mangrove tree farm, the first contraption of the series. But before we take a look at this farm, let's just briefly go over the story of how it came to be. On April 6, 2022, Mangrove was introduced in Snapshot 22W14A, and the very next day I sent this layout to Tree Huggers, which is a Discord server for all things tree farm related. The funny thing was that I actually had no idea how Mangrove grew aside from the fact that it can generate bee nests. And even then, I did not know how they actually generated. The layout that I sent would not actually work, and I'll explain why later in the video. It wasn't until June when 1.19 was officially released that I actually started wiring the farm, with the first proof of concept being shown on the 10th and another at the end of June. Nevertheless, it wasn't until September 4 that the farm was finally published because I was focused on other projects. Upon release, I believe my farm was the fastest one, but only for the first week or two. You see, there weren't many mangrove farms before mine came out, with the three notable ones being by C5, Iceberg Lettuce, and Ilmango. So there weren't really many competitions around at the time. With that said, my farm was only faster than C5's because they had not used the correct dispenser timing in their farm. A later testing with the proper timing yielded a higher rate than mine. Furthermore, Mangrove Farm's releases started ramping up on Bilibili soon after mine came out, and needless to say, most of them outdid my farm. So yeah, I got about a week or two of pride before being completely humbled by others. Although a cool fact that I did learn several months later was that Scythecraft actually built my farm on their server, and I guess that is something to take pride in. Alright, now that you know the lore behind this farm, let us finally take a look at the farm, starting with how to use it. First thing first, you'll want to add your bone meal sugar boxes to these unloaders here. And after, you can come over to this side to supply these chests with mangrove propagules. Once that's done, You can start the farm with this lever and make your way over to this corner to start picking up propagules. Finally, you'll have to aim through this tiny slit at where the dispenser is to start planting, and voila, you are now farming mangrove. Now that I have gone over how to use the farm, let's finally get technical and check out how it actually works. The first thing I want to discuss is the tree itself, because mangrove is very unusual to say the least. For starters, mangrove will not grow on a single block of dirt alone because their roots require a plus-shaped platform to generate. The size of the platform also matters because a small platform will block large tree growth, which will result in smaller trees and wasted bone meal attempts. To enable all tree sizes to grow, you'll need at least 7 blocks in all 4 directions, which is why there are these lines of blocks in the farm. Mangroves are also really difficult to detect. Their ability to grow above the dirt means that conventional bottom block detectors will not work, and the large, inconsistent areas where leaves can generate also make leaf detection highly impractical. The only somewhat consistent detection method would be to detect the roots themselves, but this would also require a way to remove the roots afterwards. So the simplest way to farm mangrove is to simply clog the farm. The last unusual feature of mangrove is the bee nest generation. Bee nests are an issue because their immovable property can stop pistons from extending. For trees like oak and birch, they'll only generate bee nests when grown next to a flower. With mangrove, however, the propagule itself is considered a flower by Minecraft, and therefore it is possible for a nest to generate. Worse still, mangrove branches create more areas for nests to generate, whereas there are only 3 possible locations on oak and birch. As far as I am aware, Iceberg Ladders was the first person to map out the possible bee nest generation spots for mangrove, and this diamond shape soon became the basis of future mangrove layouts, including mine. Earlier in the video, I mentioned that my first layout would not actually work, and it has to do with the bee nest generation. Before I talk about the layout, it's important to first know that bee nests need an adjacent log to generate, and they will always do so with the entrance facing south. With that in mind, we can overlay the bee nest diamond on top of this layout to check for unblocked nests. And to make it easier to see, I'll replace the bee nest with yellow stained glass. Straight off the bat, we can eliminate these 5 spots because they are already occupied by logs. Because the entrance of this bee nest is blocked by this log, the game would never generate them there. This means that all of these spots that are facing into a log are safe from bee nests. That leaves us with these 2 spots that can still generate, and their position is within the 5x5 area of the propagule, which would stop the tree from growing. Fortunately, we can make this layout work by simply having logs here to block those spots. And so we now have a layout that blocks all possible bee nest spots. But this wasn't what I used in the final design. I soon realized that this piston is redundant because the observer can simply be powering this log. Moreover, I can add a sticky piston here to retract the inner branches for more logs and roots. With everything wired up, this is what the final sequence looks like. Unbeknownst to me at the time, this sequence isn't actually optimal at all because this retracted log will only be harvested in the next cycle. A little over 8 months later, I would rewire the new sequence to harvest both logs, and this is what it looks like in action. The final thing that I want to talk about is this Propagule resupplying system. Unlike other trees, mangrove leaves don't drop propagules when broken. Instead, they can only be obtained from hanging propagules, which means that the player must be supplied with new propagules from somewhere else, and that's exactly what this system is for. Because a tree isn't guaranteed to grow every cycle, the spending propagules every 12 game tick would only cause them to sit here and eventually despawn. Instead, this dropper here would only trigger when the player needs it, which is done by depowering the dropper when the propagule is picked up. Initially, I thought this to be a pretty neat solution. That was until it stopped the farm. You see, this pressure plate does not care what type of item is activating it. So there is this rare case where a moss carpet would glitch its way onto the pressure plate, which would completely stop the system from supplying the player with new propagules. Eventually, the player would run out and pick up the moss carpet instead. With the moss carpet equipped, the player will then place it on the dirt and block propagules from being planted. Unlike the Propagule resupplying system, my approach to this issue was anything but neat. The solution I went with was to add a chest here to block moss carpet from glitching in, although it's not much of a solution because it could still happen, just more infrequently. In the 2 tests that I did when testing for the raid, the issue only occurred after 30 and 40 hours. Looking at all of this now, I realized that there is a very simple fix. Instead of having the chest here, I could just have added a trapdoor and kept it powered. This setup would keep unwanted items out and the player is still close enough to pick up propagules. As of writing the script for this video, it has also occurred to me that the system could have been simplified by replacing this with a node block and then adding an observer like this. Now, the dropper is triggered every cycle without the need for this entire clock right here. This change should also create more room to fit in a simple sugar box unloader instead of having all of these chests sitting around. Alright, now that I have discussed everything that there is to talk about with this mangrove tree farm, I'll go ahead and give my final thoughts to make this a complete review. Being the most recent contraption on this list, this farm is pretty close to the type of things that I would make nowadays. There isn't really much that I can do to improve it aside from maybe changing the sequence and doing some minor rewiring. With that said, however, this farm isn't worth building at all. Mangrove tree farms have come a long way since my farm was released. In fact, this powerful dual-core mangrove tree farm was released 4 months ago by Lul. Hopefully that's how you actually pronounce their name. If you need a simpler farm, you can also find other great designs in the TMC Catalog Discord server, link in the description. With all of that said, it's now time to close the video off, and to stay in character, let's do this with the exact phrases LOD would have used. I really hope you enjoyed this video, stay safe, take care, and as always, have a good one.